Hey, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Today is Wednesday. I get to with November. My name is Scarborough Hearn. I'm the director in art and her fine art, where we focus on Black culture, literature, and the fire. One of our other disability community is the community program. So Wisdom Wednesdays retired uh, earlier this year. We decided to want the white community the space, as we get older, out and role of Medicare and all those out and like that. So we're glad to have her here. Wisdom Wednesday, something that we all need, whether we're about to retire, we already retired, information that we share from people in our community who have information to share. So we've had 6 or 7 that you have in your hand schedule, and we've got every first and third week a information. Today we're excited to talk about air property. I mean, all of us have family, all of us at some point in time are touched with having property. We had to share with other people, and there was no other person to do this but Karama Neal of the Neal firm. I have it. Hey, my family and what she's done for my family, I know it should be for others. So thank you so much for being here. Let's give Karama a round of applause.
Well, thank you all. I'm really thrilled to be here. Thank you so much, Garbo, for this invitation. I'm, of course, a big fan of Pyramid books and her fine art, and it's just a pleasure and honor to be here. And I'm particularly honored and excited to talk with you all today. I figured I would kind of go through. We're a small group, which is great. I would love to make this conversational. So, if you got questions or you got a comment, I got some stuff I want to make sure we cover, but feel free to raise your hand and let's make this a conversational afternoon this afternoon. I'd love to kind of talk through, I'll share a little bit about how I came to this, why I do this work, not just thinking about my own family's property, but other people's property as well. I want to talk about the definition of heirs property, what it is, so that we understand what it is we're dealing with, why it's important, what some of the challenges are, and what some of the opportunities are with heirs property. I want to debunk some myths. I grew up with a bunch of myths. My guess is you probably either have heard these or have them yourself. And we will maybe try to debunk some of those and understand what the reality is around that as we think through this work. And then, as promised in the headline, the advertisement, I want to share 5 things you can do now. One of the things I find oftentimes when we have conversations about heirs property is it's a lot of work. I mean, we all know that. And sometimes it can be overwhelming. It can be intimidating. You're like, I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. It's like it's too much to do. Well, I want to give you 5 things you can do. Most of us can do, some of it you can do if you have your phone right now. You can start looking at it. And so I want to give you those tools. And obviously there's going to be more to follow on that, but hopefully that'll be something that'll help kind of folks kind of move through as we as you work on your property and those kinds of things. So sound all right? Okay, excellent. Let me start because we do have a few groups. I don't know that I'll just go through everybody because we'll probably have, I expect probably folks will have questions later on. But anybody want to share why they came today, what they were looking for, anything in particular like that? Anybody have? If not, it's fine. But if anybody wants to, that's welcome. Please. Yeah.
Process started family.
Hmm.
So any information I would
Yep. Other
hey,
thoughts? Thank you. Yeah.
what's the best route to with the property? Hey, I was so trying to get it. So,
Got it. Okay.
hey,
Thank you. Yeah.
pretty much what
Similar.
I did. I think the move on who lots that will kind of like, we don't argue, fighting,
Yeah.
anything, prayer, you know,
Excellent. Okay. Thank you. And thank you all for your proactive thinking. Anybody else in particular want to share? All right. So let me share. I'll kind of go through and we'll get to these things. If you want to dig a little bit more or you want some more, just, say so. So let me share a little bit about myself and why I do this work. So I mentioned earlier that my family has heirs property. When I do this sort of formally and I have slides and the whole big shebang, I show a slide that has a picture of It has a picture of my mother. I figure people can see me because I'm sitting there, right? So I'm there. Has a picture of my mother. Has a picture of my grandmother. Has a picture of her mother. Has a picture of her father. So my great great grandfather, who was enslaved, was born in Guntown, Mississippi, was enslaved. Eventually bought property in Southwest Arkansas. He had 5 kids, oldest of which was my great grandmother. Um, and he had been told when he was buying this property that if he didn't have a will, the property could never be sold. Now, in the 1800s, when he was purchasing this property, the chances that he was going to get good legal counsel were probably pretty slim, right? Obviously, that was not good legal counsel. But that is not true, right? But that's what he was told, and that's what he did because he was looking out for us. So I can't be really mad at him. He was doing the best he could with what he had. And so he bought that property. It stayed in the family, and it is heirs property. It's complex because it's multiple generations, and we are still working on it. And as I tell people that I work with through my mediation practice, I'm a mediator with the state of Arkansas, and I do mediation particularly around heirs property. I'm not an attorney, just to be clear, so there's no confusion there. But what I always often tell people is there's nothing nothing really that I'm telling you that I'm not trying to do myself. Right? We're trying to work through this just like so many other families are as well. So I grew up seeing my grandmother in particular go around to her first cousins and make sure that everybody was getting the taxes paid. You know, this is your portion. This is Aunt Savannah's portion. This is Uncle Leon's portion. This is everybody's portion. Let's get the taxes paid and get that done. So I grew up seeing her do that. And after my mom passed, I recognized that I'm now an owner. Right? This is not just theoretical. It's kind of like if you have somebody who leaves, now all of a sudden you actually do have to deal with it. It's not just sort of theoretical or thing anymore. It's yours. And so I started trying to find all the family. I think I heard some folks earlier talk about like finding family members and figuring out how to connect so you can manage the property. And my dad, who I will acknowledge is standing over here, is not directly in that family, but is my father, who is an attorney, told me that you might want to be a little careful on that because given the laws at that time, there weren't a lot of protections for families who had heirs property. It was extremely still you can still lose it, but it was extremely easier to lose it then. And so I stopped because obviously I didn't want to be the cause of the property going away. And at that point, I was literally just Googling around and found a piece of legislation called the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act. And it had been passed at that point in just a couple states. But I saw that it had a number of protections in place that if you had this law in place, it would be helpful to families like mine and probably like so many of yours and so many across the state of Arkansas. Wouldn't keep your property from ever being sold, but it would provide things like a first right of refusal, provide things like requiring an appraisal so that if the property is sold, you actually get what it's worth and it's not getting, just getting shafted from it. So it had a number of those kinds of protections in place. And so I started a statewide grassroots organization to get the UPHPA passed. It was passed in 2015. Arkansas was the 5th state in the country to have it passed. And it's called the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act. And we can talk a little bit later. I can tell you some of the features of it. We passed it in 2015. We were the 5th state in the country. It is now law in 26 states and jurisdictions across the country. Part of the reason I mention that is I think, as we think about, I always considered, I was put it on myself, I thought of heirs property as sort of a Black Southern rural thing. Like it wasn't anything that anybody else had. I mean, I didn't know anybody else who talked about heir property, but it's not. And when you see this map, and I don't have it in front of me, but when you see the map of 26 states, for example, it's not just 26 states in the South, right? That's got to be more than the South because there's 26 states and jurisdictions, right? And it is, right? You got states like Montana and Utah and Washington State and Nevada and California and New York State and Michigan and New Jersey and New York, I guess in New York State, DC, Washington State, Virgin Islands, all places across the country, right? Which lets you know these legislators aren't just passing stuff just to do something. They're passing because somebody's saying, we got this issue, right? We got this issue. And so you're seeing this across the country and you see it in all types of property. I think that's another thing too, that's really important, that at least for me was a myth, and maybe it is for you all as well, or some of you as well, is recognizing the breadth of heirs property. Not only is it all over the country, it's in all ethnic groups, right? All it takes is for somebody to own property and die without a will. Right? I mean, that's not a high bar, right? Now, many of us have, a good lawyer friend or somebody who can take care of it like that, and it doesn't persist. But that doesn't mean it wasn't heirs property for a short time, right? And so this notion of heirs property is a real thing, and you see it in New York City when you're talking about brownstones that maybe somebody inherited, same kind of thing. The mother or parents lived in the house, they bought it a long time ago, now it's worth millions of dollars, and you can imagine the folks coming after it, right? And if it's heirs property, it has all the same kinds of issues that our property might have in rural Arkansas or other places. So you see it in a variety of places, and I think that's important. My guess is many of our properties are probably in Arkansas or probably in the South. I'm not saying that we have to talk explicitly about that, but I think it's important to recognize the breadth of this. This is not just us. It's real easy to sort of pathologize Black folks and say, well, y'all are the ones got this problem. That's not true. It's not true. We're going to prioritize it today because that's who's here. But that is not true. And I think it's an important thing just to recognize lots of communities, lots of families across this country, urban and rural and suburban, of all ethnicities, deal with this issue and are working on it. So now I do a lot of work. I mentioned mediation. I do research. I lead the National Heirs Property work for a national organization, National Philanthropic Support Organization. I do educational outreach and things like this around heirs property, because that work in getting that legislation passed really sort of opened the door to a lot of that work. So I'm excited to talk with you all about that today. So first, and y'all, like I say, please raise your hand, ask questions anytime, or comment as you like. First, I want to talk about what heirs property is. And there's two main characteristics of heirs property that I think are important because they have to do with how you engage with the property. First is clouded title. Sometimes you hear it called tangle title. In fact, in Philadelphia, they don't even use the term heir property. They just call it tangle title. That's part of what you see is it's called different things in different places, and sometimes folks don't know that you're talking about the same thing because you call it by a different name. But clouded title or tangle title simply means that the names of the owners, the legal owners, the heirs, right, are not represented on the deed. We all kind of know that intuitively if you know it's heirs property. You know your name's not on there. It's all you and your siblings and your cousins or whoever, and all those names are not on the deed, right? That's what we mean by clouded title or tangled title. And you'll hear sometimes folks talk about clearing the title. That means getting those names or whatever the approach, maybe it's going to be an LLC or an entity or whatever, getting that name represented as opposed to heirs of whoever or the estate of whoever, that kind of thing. That makes sense? So that clouded title piece is important because if your name is not on the deed, what happens when there is, in Louisiana, it would be a hurricane. What happens if there's a tornado and you need disaster assistance? Can you easily prove that that's your house? You can't because your name's not on the deed, right? So you have difficulty getting access to things like disaster assistance. If you have a house and you're living in the house, I talked to a family like this the other day, and the house the person died, their parent died, the two of the kids are living in the house, the person left a second mortgage on the house. They're willing to pay, they're happy to pay, but they can't communicate with the bank to find out how much the bill is every month because their name's not on the deed, right? So if you need a loan to repair the house, repair the roof or something like that, can you get it if you can't use collateral with the property on it because your name's not on there? No, right? Like this, it makes access to all these kinds of things very, very challenging. And so that's why this clouded title concept is really important because it has to do with how, yeah, please. Clouded.
Would that be the same as having the name on?
So the will has to be properly probated, right? So you find, and I see this oftentimes, and my understanding is, I asked an attorney one time, I said, can I say expired? She said, yeah, you can say expired. Basically, a will in Arkansas expires after 5 years. And so you need to go and do the probate, do all the legal proceedings you need to do before that 5-year period, or at least get that started before that 5-year period in order to get that done. Yeah. Then you're on. I had heard an attorney say one time, there's 2 ways to dispense with your property after you're gone. Your plan, which is if you have a will or a trust or maybe a beneficiary deed. We'll talk about a little bit about some of those tools in a little while. Your plan, right? You've written out a plan and someone executes that plan, or the government plan, right? So if you don't have a plan, or you let that plan, your heirs let that plan expire or whatever, then you're on the government plan, right? So the government, all jurisdictions will have some sort of listing for how your heirs are determined. Your children and your siblings and then your parents, and there's some sort of listing of priority. And so it'll just go through. That's who's going to get the property. So if you don't have your plan, you're on the government plan. Okay? And so we'll talk about, can anybody guess what one of the 5 things is? Dealing with your estate plan, right? To avoid exactly this kind of thing, right? So So yeah, so thinking about that clouded title is important because again, it that's part of what creates challenges with actually dealing with the property because the owner's names, even if you're living there, even if you're the one paying the taxes, even if everybody in the community knows that's your house and your mama left you that house, if your name is not on the deed, that's going to make it harder, significantly harder for you to do all the other kinds of things that you would like to do with that property.
If it's not on the deed.
If your name is not on the deed, right? That's one of the characteristics of heirs property, right? Is that the names of the owners, and that's that S is there intentionally, right? Because it's multiple owners. The names of the owners are not on the deed. Yeah. So I think that would be the question for a person to talk with their attorney about and sort of understand what the I was going to say lowercase is still lowercase, but what the person's desire, what the desire of the decedent was. It may have something to do with how you engage with the other people in the family, the other potential heirs, right? If everybody agreed this is what mama wants, and even though the will is expired, they can, that may, but I think that'd be something that'd be a particular question for the attorney to talk with. Certainly worth, I would imagine, keeping the document, Okay, so clouded title is one factor. The other factor, again, which makes has to do with how we operate with property, is fractionated ownership, right? But fractionated ownership. So think fractions from grade school, right? Your ownership is in fractions, right? And so I'll use an example. Let's say there's a person that passes away. They had 4 kids. They had 100 acres of land somewhere, right? Those 4 kids, if they die without a will, like my great granddaddy did, those 4 kids now have they own a 25%, a 1/4 fractional share of that property. Now here's what's important with that, right? Sometimes I remember hearing a guy who's fairly high up in USDA talking like this, and I had to correct him because it was grating me a little bit. And he was saying, "Oh, I heard somebody got 100 acres of land, and they had 4 children, they got 25 acres." I was like, "Wait a minute, they don't have 25 acres, right? You can't go to that 100 acre. Imagine a 100-acre square, 10 by 10 square, like that's the property, right? You can't say, well, the big sister that you got the northeast corner, big brother, you got the southeast. That's not how it works, right? You have a 25% share of the whole thing, all together. That's why everybody has to work together, because you own the whole thing together, right? And I think that's an important thing. And sometimes you'll see folks will assume that somehow they have a particular portion that is theirs, but if they haven't engaged with everybody else in the family, who's to decide? Well, how come you get to build your house right next to the road, and I got to build mine way back off in the cut, and I can't even get water back off in there? Right? I mean, this is not, yes, you may each have 5 acres or whatever, but who decides where it is, right? Because that is not how it's decided. The law says is that you have that fractionated interest in the whole thing. So no one gets to decide, and it's not legal. They don't get to decide, well, this is my part and that's your part of it, right? Which means, again, you have to work together to get anything done with the property. Those 2 factors make sense. Okay, so those are 2 things. As you hear, they are really key to how you have to manage the property once you have it in that form. So we talked about how it can be all kinds of different properties. I think this is an important thing to think. Oftentimes property I gave the example of a 100-acre plot of land in a rural area. That's oftentimes a common thing, but it also could be a lot. It could be a home. We heard some people talk about homes earlier, right? It could be a house. And I think when you have something like a house, it's easier to understand how that divided ownership works. You can't divide the house in half, right? I mean, it ain't like you're going to chop it in half and you live on that side and I live on the other. So that same concept is the same concept that happens with the land. It is all yours, all together. You have to all work together in terms of what you're going to do with it. Make sense? So all kinds of properties can be a vacant lot, could be an agricultural property, could be a home, can be in any kind of community. I think our heirs property, as I said earlier, I think is often called, thought of as a rural Southern Black problem. And I would contend that it is never all of those. Because even if it's rural Southern and Black, it's not inherently a problem. If it were only a problem, none of y'all would be here. You just walked away, right? And if all it was problematic, why would you deal with it? You just go, just leave it. I ain't going to worry with it no more. It's not worth considering. But we know it is an asset, right? It is an asset. It is a sentimental asset. It's a historical asset. It's an economic asset. And so we're here, all of us, because we recognize that inherently it is an asset. It has challenges, for sure, but it is inherently an asset. Yeah.
It's also taxes.
It's maintenance, it's getting grass cut.
That's the challenges.
Because if you don't, it's gonna put a lien on it.
It is all those things as well. And those are the challenges, right? And so part of what you'll hear us talk about is shared rights and shared responsibilities, right? So we'll talk about a little bit about that as well. So it is very much, it definitely has its challenges. It's no joke. It definitely has its challenges. But inherently there's something that we feel positive about or feel like there's some positive opportunity about. Otherwise, probably wouldn't be here, you know? So let's talk a little bit about some of the myths that, at least that I've heard. Would love to hear if y'all are hearing these things. If you have things that you're like, I've heard this. Does that sound right? Let's talk about that. And if I don't know, then we can find somebody who does know. Make sure you get your questions answered. So the first thing that I'll say that I definitely grew up always hearing from my grandmother and from others, and in fact still hear today, is that heirs property cannot be sold. Anybody ever heard that? Really? Nobody's ever heard that? Okay, you have. Okay, I was gonna say, because I hear that all the time, not just in my family, but other places as well. Okay, so there is this. I'm glad that people is not hearing. That's good because it's not true. Right? So that's good. There is this sort of perception sometimes that heirs property cannot be sold. I read recently, and I think this actually probably is some sense to this, that maybe people try to convey that heirs property is difficult to sell for the family itself to sell, and so which it can be because you got to get all your folk together to try to do it. So that is, there's some difficulty there, but that does not mean it's not possible, and it doesn't mean it can't be sold, right, against the people's wishes, right? And I think that's there. I think that maybe there was a mix-up in sort of the way it was maybe talked about and the way it was received. And I think that's an important. If you hear people who have that misconception, it's an important thing to disabuse them of that notion. Because if you think it can't be sold, why should you have to do anything, right? If I think this can never be sold, I don't have to worry about the taxes. I don't have to worry about getting the yard. I don't have to worry about liens or whatever. Because I mean, it can be sold anyway. Whenever I get ready to do something, it's going to be there for me. Right? It makes you not feel like you have that responsibility because you think it's always going to, you take it for granted. You think it's always going to be there because you think it can never be sold. So I'm really glad there weren't very many people who thought that here. That's unusual. I'm very pleased about it. But if you hear that, just make sure to disabuse people of that notion. Sometimes people think that it can't, if you have your taxes paid on it, it cannot be sold. And so simply keeping the taxes paid at all times will mean that it can never be sold. That is not true. Right? That is not true. There are ways that it can happen. And I say this not to sort of make people afraid, but so that you understand what the landscape is and sort of what you're the environment you're working in. Simply having the taxes paid does not mean the property can never be sold and nobody can ever, try to claim your property. Simply living in the property or on the property does not mean that it cannot be sold. Sometimes people think that, that if somebody's living there, well, if their property is protected, they'll always have a place. That's not necessarily true. The part of what happens with the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act is that it requires a judge when it's invoked. It requires a judge to consider all the kinds of factors that are out there. So it can be a factor, but that just in and of itself, saying somebody's living on the property, making sure the taxes are paid, is not enough to say it can never be sold. All right. The one that I've heard I just heard it recently from some relatives that I met, and I've heard it now more frequently, is this notion that the oldest child controls everything. The oldest child in whatever line. I've seen some nods. Other people hearing this have heard this one as well. Well, I've definitely heard this, that the oldest child is the one who is in control. Now, maybe that's just an agreement y'all got in y'all. I'm an only child, so it's harder for me. I grew up as an only child. It's hard for me to get that, but maybe that's an agreement y'all have. But in the example we gave with the person who died and had 100 acres and 4 kids, everybody got the same 25% interest. There's no bonus points because you're the oldest. So again, the family will need to decide what their dynamic is and how they operate, and maybe they decide that the oldest one is in the best position. Yeah, maybe that's the youngest one who's in the best position to manage the property. It could be anything, but just the fact of being oldest doesn't mean you're in control. And I think sometimes people can. I've heard that now multiple times, and just in recent months or so, that misnomer. Any other things that folks hearing? Are there things that you all have heard about heirs property? You're like, I wonder if that's right. That doesn't sound right. Yeah, yeah.
Hey,
Right in.
hey, Also, hey, look at that. All the kids. It's so, hey, 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 right.
I mean, I think that's what my great great granddaddy heard, right? That don't do a will and it'll always stay in the family, right? So it's a similar kind of thing. And I think the difference, what I would hope would be the case, the difference between now and then I don't think there was any real hope of my great great granddaddy having access to good legal counsel. Now I hope we do have access to good legal counsel, right? Someone who can help you say, yes, I want to leave this in the family. Yes, I want the family to always have it. Now, what are the legal documents I need to put in place to make sure that that happens, right? And it is not just dying without a will, right? Which is what my folks were told, and maybe what some other folks are told and still believe. But it is really taking advantage of those opportunities that are out there to make sure that you have good, strong estate planning that aligns with what the wishes are of the person. Other thoughts? Yeah.
I heard that our music is cheap. What's for free? So, hey, okay. Hey,
I think so. I think it would. My guess is there would have to be a particular kind of analysis of that particular situation. Certainly, if there are, this is not necessarily an heirs property example, but I think it's kind of relatable. Is if you haven't been mowing your yard, you got a lien placed on your property because you haven't paid the taxes or those kinds of. It doesn't have to be necessarily be the case with heirs property, but then it can go to be sold because, and then if the government's been the one mowing the lawn, they're going to recoup some of their expenses as part of that, right? So I think I would hesitate to make a blanket statement that that's the case. There are certainly times when if the government has made expenditures based on that property that they may be able to recoup some of that in the event of a sale. Again, a lot of that's going to have to depend on the particular situation.
If you don't pay your taxes for, I think, 3 years, they can auction it off.
Right, that's the tax foreclosure, right? And let me just say, since you mentioned that, it's an important piece because how many people? So when the taxes, we just had the thing in the paper the other day, right, with all the overdue taxes. So people who got the paper, or people who remember getting the paper, remember seeing that list that comes out in October, November of all the unpaid, everybody who's late on paying their taxes, right? When did we get that tax bill? I think I got mine in February. They come pretty early in the year. But they come pretty early in the year, right? So that's the point is we didn't just get it in September, right? We had it a long time ago. So you can imagine if that's your own property, you're the sole owner of it, you got the bill, you can kind of manage what you're going to do. I'm going to pay this, I'm going to schedule a check. It's April, but I'm going to schedule a check for September. So they don't earn interest on my money. You can do whatever you want to do, right? You got a plan. But imagine you got 4 siblings or 22 siblings, 22 cousins or 200 cousins, right? Who's getting the tax bill? You think they're sending 22 tax bills? No, they're not, right? Do you know who's getting the tax bill? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. I mean, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, right? Even if you do know who's getting the tax bill, do you know that they paid the tax bill? Right? So all of those kinds of things contribute to the kind of foreclosure that you're just talking about, and why heirs property can be really susceptible to that. It's not that it's the same process as it would be for any property that you didn't pay your taxes on, that could go up for sale after a period of time. But with heirs property, that's even more likely because that process of notification and coordination can be a little challenging, right? If it's just two of y'all live next door to each other, then fine. But you got cousins all over the country, half of y'all don't know each other, you didn't have a reunion in 15 years. You don't know where the taxes are going. I mean, most of us don't know where taxes, are they getting paid, those kinds of things, right? So it is an important thing. I think, as you can see, a lot of the kinds of work that around keeping your home or keeping your property in general, those issues are exacerbated in the context of heirs property. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Define estate versus trust.
So I'm not an attorney, and so I'm not going to venture an exact definition of that. But what I will say is, if you think about estate planning, right? So thinking about what happens to all of the things you own after you're gone, right? I think that's a way of thinking about estate planning. There are many ways to do estate planning, right? Including things like a trust or a will or a beneficiary deed or a payable on death account, or all kinds of things that are out there. And we'll talk a little bit about those as we go on. So I think a way to think about that is you said estate, but let's say estate planning It's thinking about all those things that you own, which could be the estate, right? The collective of all the things that you own and what happens to them. A trust is one way of determining what happens to them. A will is another way of determining what happens to them. A beneficiary deed is another tool for determining what happens to them. There are lots of different tools that are out there. And so we'll talk a little bit about what some of those kinds of things are. Other thoughts? I'm about to get to the 5 things and some stories to illustrate those things. All right, so 5 things you can do now. So y'all have a preview because you got these things up here, but I want to share some examples of some of these things that I think might be helpful as well. So first thing, we just talked about this, pay your taxes, right? Taxes are public information. A lot of times folks don't recognize that. Typically, they are public information. You have on your handout the website for it. Go and look and see what the taxes are. I mean, it's a simple thing. If you got, I mean, I will say just for my own family, there have been many years when I wasn't sure, just like we talked about, I wasn't sure who was paying the taxes. I remember at one point I had a relative, I knew the taxes were in her name, and that particular year I had heard that she was diagnosed with dementia. And I thought to myself, paying the taxes is probably not the first thing on her mind, right? And so I went and I looked up the taxes and I paid the taxes. You know, anybody can do that, right? So you can look it up, you can see what the tax bill is, you can pay it. And again, I'm not saying that's necessarily the ideal thing to do, and I'll talk a little bit about that in just a second, but you definitely want to get them paid, right? You don't want them unpaid, right? And it's public information. I met with a family a while ago who they were the 2nd generation. So the parents had all, the siblings had all inherited property. They had kids. And they wanted me to meet with the 2nd generation. I had to get them thinking about the property and what their rights and responsibilities and all those kinds of things would be with it. And you could hear them talk about, like, you know, I'm pleased to have this. I'm glad that my grandparents left me this legacy. But man, it's just going to be so expensive. I'm so nervous about it. I'm not sure. I said, okay, let's look up this site. So we went on the website. We were doing this by Zoom because they were all over the country. I said, actually all over the world. And I said, let's go to this website and look it up. Okay, I'm going to look it up. I'm going to share my screen, but y'all can do this too. Like, this is public information. I don't have some special gift here. It's public information, right? We looked up the taxes and we found their lots and their properties, and they were shocked at how little the taxes were. Shocked, right? So all this buildup that they had in their mind could have been relieved if they just looked up the taxes, right? So I think that's an important thing to do. I'll tell you another story. I had a woman call me, and she was asking questions about her property and trying to think through things to do. And one of the first questions I asked, are your taxes paid? You know, first, because let's just make sure that's in place first off. She said, oh yeah, my uncle pays them every year. We're all set. And I was like, okay. And she said she was so pleased because she knew her uncle was dependable and had them paid and everything was good. I say, that is fantastic. I'm really glad to hear they're paid. Glad you know who's doing it. And y'all are in communication. That's excellent. I said, but if this is heirs property and you have a group of you that own that property, shouldn't a group of you have responsibility for paying the taxes? And it never occurred to her, right? Her uncle had just always taken care of it. And it was great that it was being taken care of, but she owned the property too. Is she breaking off a little bit for her uncle? You know, for her portion? I mean, seriously, for her portion, right? And so oftentimes we will have a family member or one who is sort of taking, I won't even say taking control, but taking responsibility. They make sure the taxes are paid. They make sure it's done. But, you know, as I said, I grew up seeing my grandmother go to all her first cousins and collect the money for the taxes. That gets harder and harder to do the bigger the families are. It's harder and harder to do if there's not relationships between the family members, right? And so sometimes, like I did with a time when my cousin had dementia, you just go and get them paid, right? It's certainly important to get them paid, but I think in an ideal scenario, all of you would have collective responsibility. You have collective rights to the property, you got collective responsibility for the property. And so one thing to think, yeah. Whole sway? Yeah. Not necessarily. Yeah, not necessarily. I mean, there may be, you know, if there were, let's say the property was sold for some reason and the person could show evidence that they've been paying taxes over this period of time, they might get more of that money from the sale back because they have been paying the taxes, you know, other folks hadn't been. But and you do see this, so I'm glad you reiterated this. Just because you're paying taxes doesn't mean it can't be sold, also doesn't mean you get to control everything, you know? And I think, you know, as we think about some of our properties, again, depending on where you are, what kind of property it is, that can be really complex because maybe somebody's paying the taxes, but maybe somebody else is keeping up the maintenance on the property. You know, maybe somebody else is doing other things. So how is that balance working out? And so it's not just an automatic, just because I pay the taxes, I'm in control. Taxes do need to get paid though. And I think that's also another reason, your question to your point, that's also another reason why I think it can be really helpful to try to pay the taxes collectively if possible. And I'll say, I was, we are trying to get back to that. I mentioned my grandmother and what she did. That is not what's been happening in recent generations, recent years. And I've been trying to get back to that. And so I recently, a couple of years ago, I emailed texted all my cousins on my, said my great granddaddy had five kids. So all the ones in his line that I had a phone number for, I texted and said, look, I'm gonna pay the woman who's been paying the taxes. I'm gonna send her a portion for for Vashti, my great grandmother. I'm sending our portion. If you want to contribute to it, let me know, right? Because I wanted the person who's been paying the taxes to know this is not your sole responsibility. We all own it together. And so I'm coming up with our part. We're gonna represent on our part. And I wanted, and that's not just on me, right? That's on and so the phone numbers I had, it's not everybody, but the phone numbers I had, I texted in everybody to a person, except one person who I think I had the wrong number for. Everybody to a person sent money, was happy to send money, had no problem sending money, not an issue at all. And honestly, I was pleasantly surprised and pleased, right? Well, I'll tell you what I think the issue was. I'll tell you why I think it was helpful. And this is why I mentioned this, right? One, we weren't begging for money. It wasn't a lot of money, right? Because it was clear we weren't saying like, oh my goodness, we about to lose the power. We got to find $20,000. That was not the issue, right? Everybody could tell from the amount of money it was, I'm asking for like $2, $3. I mean, it was not very much. The issue was, are you being responsible for the property that you own? And I had several people who, again, these are not folks who I was talking because we don't have that same, we're trying to build that communication, which is the same thing I'm going to encourage you all to do as well. Trying to build that communication. Several people said, well, of course you got to pay property taxes on your property because they have a house of their own. They got a car of their own. They pay taxes on that stuff. So they do it in their personal life for their own property. And so when they came to come and do this, especially because it wasn't a ton, and it wasn't like we were begging or like we're about to lose property, the world's about to come to an end, we said, look, this is our collective responsibility. Do you want to step up to it? And people were willing to do it. And again, I totally hear you. That may not always be the case, but I would encourage folks to think about how you can ask that question. Yeah.
We got to take that. Hey, we use that 30% of our.
Oh, goodness, no.
Okay.
I say goodness, no. I guess probably fifth.
Fifth?
Yeah. It was my great-great-grandfather that bought the park.
Hey,
It goes back a ways.
and yeah, looking like anyway.
I'm an heir because my mom is gone. My mother and my grandmother are gone.
Hey,
So
it was like.
uh-huh.
Yeah. Hey. Hey, my sister was. Hey, chocolate. Hey,
Again, because you didn't sell it. Yeah, I mean, again, you would have to look at the particular situation, right? So if it truly was heirs property, your mom had passed and it went down the government plan sort of went down to include your I guess nieces and nephews or something at that point, then potentially so, right? And I think that's often a challenge, and we'll talk about that as we get to some of the kinds of things, like recognizing who the family is so that you know how to deal with the property. So that's a few things on taxes. Other questions on taxes or thoughts on taxes folks want to share? Consider, get them paid, and if possible, consider spreading the responsibility. I'll give another example. I talked with someone one time, and they were like, I just would love to see us be able to do something to this property and make it work, something, make it beneficial to us, get some money off of this thing. And I said, I love that idea. I agree with you 100%. But if we can't pay $200-300 in taxes together, how are we gonna manage a whole timber thing? That's just a recipe for disaster. So that even if it's a small amount, right, it's about building that relationship and building that engagement so that you have a foundation for doing the more complicated stuff, doing the stuff that might actually earn you some money, or allow that kind of stuff later on, because you have a foundation of trust, you have a foundation of relationship to build that on. Other thoughts?
Hey,
Yeah.
Hey. Hey, hey, oh, come on. Hey, hey, first, hey, hey, oh, hey, 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 right, hey, hey, hey.
Yep. Yeah, it's important. I mean, again, depending on where your property is, it's important to visit it. I mean, I remember going to ours and we found a deer stand. I'm not sure who's using it. I wore orange because I'm like, I don't want to get shot. So yeah, it is important to do that. I think it's important to show that you're engaged. And so even if it means, we put up no trespassing signs on our property. You can put up fencing, you can do all those kinds of things. And whether it stops at all or not, you are showing that you are engaged with the property, right? So I think those kinds of things are really important to do that, to have those kinds of conversations. Even if it, like I say, even if it doesn't stop all the activity, it does show that you are engaged, that you're monitoring, that you're actively involved in the property. All right, that was number one, taxes. Number two, work on your family tree. Okay, we talked about this, have touched on it in a number of ways already. But this is so important, right? You have to know who the family is, who the heirs are. And because you're on the because by definition being on heirs property, you're on the government plan, right? I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to claim I know all of the details around. My dad has told me those before, and I don't remember, but like, because he's an attorney. But what happens with the surviving spouse and how that works. I don't know all those details, right? That's why you hire an attorney. But when you go to the attorney, you got to give them something to work with, right? That's something to work with is that detailed family tree, right? So you're starting from the person. I was going to say, I went to a family reunion one time and they were like, let's work on the family tree. And they handed out these pieces of paper and it was an ascendant family tree. And by ascendant family tree, it means it starts with you and it has your parents, your grandparents, your great. So it goes up and up and up and that way. That's completely the opposite of what you need for heirs property, right? For heirs property, you need a descendant family tree, right? You need to start from my great great granddad. You need to start from your mother. You need to start from your mother. You need to start from the top and go down. Descendant family tree, right? So it's two. So make sure if you're trying to collect this, you're thinking about it the right way, right? So you need to know all those descendants. You need to know when they were born. You need to know when they died. You need to know where they died. Anybody have any idea why it might be important to know where they died? What if they had a will and they said something about that interest in the will? That will is going to be probated where they died, right? So ideally, you need to know where they died, right? You need to know, did they have a surviving spouse? Because that can complicate things. You need to know all of their children. That's, for some of us, that's easy. But I think you hear what I'm getting at, right? So for some of us, if you're the one pushed it out, you pretty much know how much you pushed out. But if you didn't, you got other situations, you may not know all the children, right? And so that's that. I mean, that sounds pretty simple, but that's not necessarily always straightforward, right? I think about, maybe a man who might not know that he had a child, right? Or maybe he knew he had a child, but that was last generation, and you don't know he had a child. You don't know everything. Maybe he had somebody that, just lost knowledge to you, right? That doesn't mean that person's not necessarily there, right? So think about that. Think about, children who were raised in the family, and everybody acknowledges them as family. Everybody calls them cousin. Everybody welcomes them to the family reunion, but they're not actually family. Have not legally been adopted, right? And so you have to think about what that looks like. But you want to write everything down, right? So that as you talk with your attorney, they can sort through what that looks like and who needs to be where, right? You also want to write down, particularly as you're going through, you need to write down contact information. I've heard people say, well, I'm friends. I'd say this myself. Friends with them on Facebook. Okay, that's fine. But when time comes to sign a legal document, do you have an address? Right? Do they know you well enough that when they get that piece of mail that they're going to open it and read it and call you and engage with it? Right? So you need contact information where you can have that, right? You also need to think about, importantly, the next generations. And I made that plural on purpose, right? It's not just one generation. Go down as far as you can, because none of us is here forever, right? And by the time you get this thing started, the person you listed may not be here, because none of us is here forever. And now you got to deal with their 3 kids. And do you know their 3 kids? And do you have their address and their contact information? So start collecting all that kind of stuff now. One of the things my family did, we have a family meeting, and the goal of that meeting was everybody was bring all of the obituaries they had. And that's what we did. And while we had the meeting, we had somebody who was scanning obituaries. And we set up an email account that was a family email account. We scanned the obituaries and sent the scan to that email account. So you have the obituary. Now, everybody don't always tell the truth on obituaries. I can think of some examples of that, which I won't share here. But so I'm not saying it's a perfect thing, but it is certainly an example. If you can find this obituary and say, so and so is deceased, leads to more than 3 kids, and their names are there and their locations are there. That's a starting point. So collect those obituaries and collect them in a form that other people can use, right? So again, if you just have it in your drawer and nobody knows it's there, and it takes you 5 days to find it again, that's not. I'm not talking about myself, right? So I guess somebody needs to find for somebody right now. I'm like, I don't know when I'm gonna find it. That's not as good as if it's in a place where everybody knows that's where it is. You can find it. Maybe it's organized by family, so you can find the information that you need. So think about that as you're thinking about your family tree. And think broadly. So you want the contact information, you want everybody, you want to go deep, so multiple generations, even the ones that are not yet heirs, because you don't know what's going to happen. You need to know who those folks are, and make it as complete as possible, so that when you do decide to do some work on it, you're working on it. You have the information that you need. Thoughts, questions on family tree?
Stop. Listen up. Tree. Yeah. Hey, talk with all of it and not have exact 2 bills. But it was still, hey, second generation. So they get ready. Hey, is there you say trying to find about so that get you're run okay.
And we just leave us. So a couple things I'd say, and again, not an attorney, it sounds like this particular case is something you want to talk with someone about to make sure that you're abiding with the law and being as kind or as generous you want to the people who didn't leave a will, or et cetera. But one is, it sounds like there may already be an LLC, so there may already be something written in there that says something about the process. I don't know that. That would be a particular question to deal with that particular setup that you have. In general, and again, I'm telling you what I do for my own family, what I suggest for others, make it as inclusive as possible, right? You'd much rather go to the attorney and say, this is everything I know. I've researched and this is everything I know, and have them say, okay, you know what? This person sold their interest back in 1892 and none of their kids are, and so that's fine. They can call them off the list, right? Because now you have, but you'd much rather have that than be like, well, what about so-and-so? I ain't heard nothing about them. I heard that they had 2 kids, but I don't see anything written. Where are the rest? And now you don't have anything. Now you're back to the drawing board on that side of the family trying to find that information out. So if there's been some document like an LLC or trust or something like that that dictates how the organization flows through the family, then that's probably something to depend on. But if it's just strictly heirs property, you're working on the government plan, and you're doing this so that again, when you go to the attorney, you have the information you need. My recommendation, or what I do for myself, be as complete as possible. I have a relative who my grandmother told me had 2 kids, and I have a picture of those 2 kids. I have her name. She's written their names on the back of the picture of those 2 kids. So I feel like they're real, is my point. There's a picture. She wrote the name on the back. She's older than I was. I feel like they're real. Nobody alive today that I've ever talked to has ever heard that he had kids, this particular person, right? And so, and I can't argue with them. All I can say is my grandmother said he had 2 kids, and I got a picture of them. And her name is, she's written their names on the back. Now, for all I know, maybe those kids died very young. And so by the time we get to now, nobody knows they existed, and they never be of an age for anybody to know them that's alive now. That's actually my guess is what happened. Maybe they died young, or maybe they went away. I don't know. But my point is, if I'm making the family tree, I'm putting their name on it. Because I'm not going to leave it out and then be like, well, then have some kind of issue. They show up, and then or their grandkids show up, and so my recommendation is to just be as fulsome as possible, so that you'd much rather have that situation where somebody is taken off for legal reasons or other reasons, then now you got to investigate a whole new side that you didn't even had disregarded before. Other thoughts? Ready for number 3? Number 3, connect with your family. All right, so we've been talking about this whole time. It is a really important thing. This is, you're working together. We talked about the fractionated ownership piece, right? That means you're all in it together until you get it resolved, until you decide, you know what, there's 2 of us. This is a big lot. We're just going to divide the lot in half, and you take that half, and I take that half. Then you don't have to work with them anymore, because you got your part by the law, and they got their part by the law. They can do whatever they want to with it. You can do whatever you want. Until you get to that point, y'all working together, right? And so you really do need to know your family, and you need to engage. It's important to engage with them. Again, I'm not telling you anything I'm not trying to do myself. Find the family members, work with them, engage them. I think it's important to build relationship with the family, because that's the foundation for which you can have the harder conversations and do the work on. I will say in my experience, both personally and professionally, when I talk with other families, sometimes it's harder to do this the closer you are to the family, right? So I'll give you an example. I had a mediation clients one time who were sisters, and they were arguing over a piece of property. Their mom had died in 2021. They had not spoken since their mother's funeral. This was now I guess this was last year when I worked with them, 2024. So it's been 3 years since they've spoken to each other. They were so like at odds that even though we were doing this by Zoom, because the property was in Arkansas, but they were in 2 other different states, they couldn't be in the same Zoom room together. And I remember being at one point, I'm kind of going back and forth between the rooms and everything. And this one sister said, well, she shouldn't have to do this because she got to go to Disney World and I never got to go. I had all this. I'm like, that ain't got nothing to do with the party. But I mean, we laugh, right? But we all know when stuff is close, it's close. And for her, that really did matter. That she felt like she got the raw end of the stick, and now she was in her head maybe getting the raw end of the stick again. And all of that was very related. It was all very clear. And she talked to me in private session about how her mother put responsibility on her, and her sister got to go to the school she wanted to go, how she wanted to go to, and she didn't get to go. All that stuff was wrapped up in it, right? And we all have family. We all know that can be difficult. That's what it is. What I find, although it has another set of challenges, is the farther you get away from that original owner, the easier it is to deal, because you don't have those issues. None of us alive knew my great-great-granddaddy. None of us could say, well, he was my favorite. He gave you. No, because we all know he's been gone. So when you have, so I don't say that lightly when I say get to know your family. I know that can be hard. And you see it in different, it can play out in lots of different ways. Regardless, though, it is heirs property. It is the family land, the family property. So you have to figure out how to kind of work together. And how to build that relationship so you have the foundation to do whatever it is you're going to do, even if it's sell the property. You got to have that foundation so you can figure out how you're going to divvy up the money after. You got to have the foundation so you can figure out how to do those things. Paying the taxes together, that may be one way to do that. Figuring out how you're going to manage the property, all those kinds of things can be ways to do that. So getting to know your family, I think, is a really important thing. Being clear about sharing, not just, sometimes I think it can be switched. It can go either way. I've heard people only sort of want to talk about the rights. So they're just all excited. Now, I really want to talk to you. We're going to figure out what we're going to do with this property and how we're going to do it. But they're not talking about the responsibilities. I've also seen it the reverse, where all anybody ever talks about is responsibilities. And that just drags people down because they're not excited about like what we can do with it or how they're going to ever get out of it. They just sort of bog down the responsibilities. So you got to balance that rights and responsibilities conversation, because again, you're all in it together until you're not. Right? Until you make those plans that you're not. I would encourage also, folks, as you're thinking about the family, not just the current heirs, but also the next generation and how important that is, right? Because if you don't know, that I told y'all about when I give talks like this, oftentimes I have slides, I'll show that picture and tell you about all the ancestors I have. Well, I also have a picture of the property. I remember the first time I made that slide, I showed it to my daughter. She was probably 7 or 8 at the time. And I said, look, this is all your people, your mother, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, all the folks up. And she said, where am I? I said, well, I said, look, this is a long picture, a big panorama picture. And actually, she is in the picture. She's like 2 pixels tall. But she and her cousin, because they were out playing on the property, right? And so way in the distance, if you look real close, you can see two things that look like they might be two little girls out there running in the property, right? But I share that because I wanted her to be on the property. I wanted her to see it. Like my mother was born on that property. I was not, but I visited very frequently. I have fond memories of being on the property. And while my daughter has visited less than I did when I was a kid, she has fond memories too. She remembers being on it. She's engaged. She's been out there and hung out. She's had a good time out there. And so if people, whatever that property is, whether it's a home or a piece of agricultural land or the old family plot, the cemetery, whatever it may be, if those next generations are not engaged, if they don't have a feeling for it, they're going to be much less likely to deal with it, right? And so in any way, right? And so if they have that shared, I think it's important to share those stories of the property, share what's happening, engage them in it so that they are making decisions, whatever those decisions might be, with the full information. So that's number 3. Number 4, create a shared vision for your property. So again, I think this is an important thing, and I say this from my own experience, from when I talk with other families as well. We often think about the property in the past, right? This is Big Mama's house. This is the family land. This is the old homestead. It's all about the past. And I just shared with you, like, I lead with that picture that I showed that goes all the way back. So I'm all about the past. I love the history. I think that's I love it. It's an important, critical part, but it can't be the only thing. It cannot be the only thing. And so I think it's really important to create a shared vision. What do you want to do? Because I'll give you an example I shared with my own family. I said, if we were talking about the work that we would need to do to clear the title, right, to figure out how to get it in the LLC or something like that would last in a better way than what the heirs property is. And I said to somebody, I said, if all we're going to do is go and just look at the property periodically and smile and tell stories and run around, which is what we do. And it's a ball. I did it about 2 weeks ago. I was there last month. It was great, right? But if that's all we're going to do, we don't need to go through all that. You know what I mean? If that's all we're going to do, we can just pay the little taxes and go down there periodically and look at it and smile and tell stories. And that's a ball. Like I say, I literally was just there last month. And I plan to go again soon. It's great. But if that's all you're going to do, that's not enough to build that huge family tree. That's not enough to investigate the kind of relationships and stuff. Yeah. How much does it in terms of cost? Is that what you mean? Process. So it can be depend. So I think let me say it depends on what the goals are of the family. And increasing, I was just at an heirs property conference in where was I? DC. I remember where it was. In DC a couple weeks ago. And part of what the conversation was, which is where my head was going, I was glad to see other people thinking the same way, is that historically there's been a lot of focus on clearing the title, meaning that the names are accurately represented on the deed, or there's an LLC and we know who's behind the LLC and it's all the names, all the family. It's totally clear, right? And for some folks that may be desirable, that may be very feasible, and that may be exactly the plan. And I think that, again, depending on what the state law is, depending on what the kinds of, other kinds of things that are in place, the corporate law, that kind of stuff, there may be variations in how that happens. Part of what I'm hearing, though, and I kind of come to this conclusion myself, and I'm starting to hear other people who are working in this field nationally think the same way, is that we need to think more about resolving the issues, right? So that may mean clear title. It may mean something else. It may mean that you resolve part of it. It may mean that you get it down to, you got 22 heirs. I'm making this up. You got 22 heirs, and you go to each of the 22 and you say, do y'all want to really be involved or not? Because you got a relationship, so you can have a real conversation, right? What you really thinking about this? And if they say, you know what, I love y'all, and I still want to come to the reunion, but I do not want to deal with this property. And then you figure out what they can do with it. Are they going to give it? They're going to give their 1/22nd. I'll make that up. The person had 22 children. That's a lot. They're going to give their 1/22nd share to their sister. Are they going to sell their 1/22nd share? Are they going to leave it to them in the will? Like you can figure that out. So maybe now those 22 heirs are maybe they're down to 10 or something, right? So that may be, and those 10 are all working really close together and they can manage it going forward. My point is that it really depends on what the goals are of the family, what they want to see. And sometimes actually clearing title, making sure that all the names are represented either on the deed or in the organization that is now owning the property, an LLC or that kind of thing, that may be the right path. In some cases, it may not be the right path. the best path, the path that aligns best with the family wants. And I went to cost. That was, it didn't sound like that's exactly where you were going immediately, but it can be costly depending on what the, the size of the family. You got 2 kids, that's one thing. You got 22 or 200, that's probably another. That's why we're doing that whole big gigantic family tree, right? Who own the property? All of their heirs, their surviving spouses, if there were some, those kids. You write the whole thing down. And maybe there's something that happened in some kind of way that, reduced the line or something. Your attorney can help you figure that out. But it can include, distant relatives, But again, that's why I think it's important to really think, what does the family want? And not assume that everyone has to fit in this box of clear title. That certainly legally is ideal. I think I'll say this. I think, the United States, we value property rights a lot. We're very much, property. This is, we're all about property rights, right? But that property right is really just like individual rights, or maybe a couple. It is not designed to deal with collective property rights, right? This is why the Native Americans couldn't, because folks came over here, they were not ready to deal with collective property rights. Cooperatives even don't have really, I've talked with lawyers who work in the cooperative space, which is collective, people operating collectively. And they're like, yeah, we can do it, but the law is not great around cooperatives. We don't have good law around cooperative, collective, ownership. And so while clearing title works well because it aligns back with what we do have, which is individual. This entity, the such and such LLC owns this property. Everybody knows what that means. That's fine, right? But when we want to do something a little bit different, it's harder. But that may be what is best for the family. And so I think that's important. So I would just say it can differ based on the law, yes. I think, it's important to think about what the family wants and what is feasible for the family. One of the things I think about is like, what does it mean? And I encourage my clients to think about this as well. What does it mean for relationships, right? If you are going to clear the title and find all those distant cousins and all those kind of things, you find your set of play cousins that everybody loves, who, you always thought of them as your cousin. Not really your cousin. Do you want to blow up that relationship over a 360th interest in the property? I mean, anybody can make whatever decision they want to, right? But I think that's you should ask that question before you go in, and then all of a sudden now they don't want to talk to you anymore because you acting like they ain't family anymore, and you just have to think about those things. And so when we think about clearing title, you have to do all that because now those play cousins not in it anymore. But maybe you don't care, maybe you're not that stressed about it, and you want them in the family because they always have been. And so maybe you think about a different approach. So I just think all those pieces are important. Okay, so creating your shared vision, think about the future. One of the links on your page, I should say the QR code that's on your document links to a resource guide that has like 2 pages of resources in a lot of these areas. So there's much more stuff there. So check that out at your leisure. But the piece that's on the paper that you have there is a document from the Bowen Law School. They used to have an Heirs property clinic. They still have a business innovations clinic. And at one point, they partnered to create the document that's linked there, and it's called Property That Provides. And it takes the whole state and looks at what you can do with property in each state, in each part of the state, to help you think about what you can do with your heirs property. I think for many of us, it's very easy to think, okay, well, they always grew timber on this property, so it's timberland. That's what you do on this property. Or we always grew cotton. That's what you do. It's cotton. But that doesn't mean we limit to that. That was 50 years ago, 100 years ago. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what you need to do with it now. Maybe you want to put solar panels on it. Maybe you want to put a wind farm on it. Maybe you want to make it into a glamping. Anybody know about glamping? Glamping is glamour camping. It's evidently a big thing. I just do regular camping, but evidently glamping is the thing. Maybe you want to turn it into. I went to a place actually in Mississippi, and they had it wasn't Heirs property, but they had a meat processing facility on there. They grew their own pigs and goats and stuff. And then kind of off when I was touring it, this one was at USDA, they had a whole yurt and a whole glamping thing. They had people come from all over. They stay in the little yurt and have it. He had multiple streams of income going on, right? Point is, it doesn't have to be just because when your grandmama grew up on the property, it was this. That doesn't mean that's what it has to be now. I talked to a family one time, or heard about a family one time. They had property, had a house, and it was their mother's house. Neither one of the children wanted to live in the house at that time. They rehabbed it, and it's now Airbnb, right? So my point is, you got lots of different options. And so if you think in the future, like thinking about what it can be, how it can contribute, how people, that helps get people excited to do all the work we've just been talking about. If I'm not going, I personally, Karama, I'm not going to do all that work if all I'm going to do is just go down there and smile 2 or 3 times a year. I mean, I'd love to go down there and smile 2 or 3, but if that's all I'm going to do, it ain't worth all of this. You know? So you got to be doing something more, and I think that something more is what can energize people, get people excited about what is next and what they want, how they want to move forward. All right, number 5, we've been tiptoeing around this, is estate planning. This is important for at least 2 reasons, right? We want to prevent this kind of thing in the future, right? Doesn't mean we want to prevent people having property or the property, creating generational wealth for it to go from family to family. But we want to do it in a way that doesn't have all the challenges that we've been talking about, right? That doesn't require you to engage and limit the ways that you can access funds and dollars and those kinds of things. You want to think about it that way. So think critically about estate planning. And I'm saying estate planning really intentionally because I think we often default to, and we've heard this before, wills, right? So let me give you just a quick story. So I used to work for an organization that had that would host wills clinics periodically. They did tax preparation. They would also host wills clinics as part of that. So they have legal aid attorneys and other attorneys come in and do wills. And because I'm not an attorney, I appreciate the process, but my role was to be witness. And so I would go, and the person would, do their will, and it'd be time for them to sign, and all the conversation would stop. We'd look, does this person look like they sound? They're not being coerced by somebody to make them sign. We took it really seriously, right? So we witnessed on that and say, I'm witnessing that this person seems to sound mind. They seem to be making the decisions on their own accord, and they're signing this. This is who they are, and I'm signing as a witness. So that's been 8, 10, 12 years ago that I was doing this, right? Last summer, I get this call. Pick up the phone. Speak to Karama, Neal. This is she. Ma'am, your name is on my mother's will. I said, who is your mother? I don't know. I'm like, am I about to? I'm like, wow. I'm just completely out of the blue, right? So I get this. I don't know who this woman is. So anyway, it turns out as we talk, and she tells me where her mother was and that kind of stuff. Turns out I'm 100% sure she was one of these people whose wills I witnessed, right? I don't remember her exactly, but I remember that time and what I was doing. And so I'm sure that's what happened. So so her mom had died in 2021. This was now 2024, right? And she said, I have this, and we're on the phone, but in my head, she said, I got this paper, I got this will, and I don't know what to do with it, right? Her mom had died in 2021. It's 2024. We already talked about the expiration thing, right? So just think about this. This woman has had this piece of paper for 3 years, right? Didn't know what to do with it. When I witnessed, I did not put my phone number, my email address. I didn't put anything on there. So she had to find me, is my point, right? So she's having to do the work to try to fix. She has no idea what to do with it. She's like, let me just call somebody. And I guess I'm probably the only Karama Neal, and so I'm probably easy to find. My stuff is out there. So, she found me, and thankfully I was able to give her some guidance and stuff. But again, think about what that looks like. So she had a will. The point is the woman had a will, right? And while I don't remember this woman in particular, I remember the conversation, seeing how relieved people would be when they got that will done. It's something a lot of us put it off. It's kind of a pain, even if you're not like, oh, I don't want to think about death. It's still a pain. Like you still got to figure out how to navigate all that stuff. It's a lot of work, right? And so I remember seeing the relief on many people's faces when they'd be like, oh my goodness, this is done. I don't have to worry about this. This is done. So I'm sure that woman, I expect she probably felt the same way. She was probably so relieved. And yet her daughter didn't know what to do with the paper, right? And now it's been 3 years. So that's one issue. She had to go and look and try to find some stuff. And so hopefully she found an attorney and was able to deal with it. Also, she said this leaves, it says the house is left to me and my brother. So we said that heirs property has 2 characteristics, right? One is clouded title, and the other is fractionated ownership. So this is not clouded title, right? If she goes and gets this done, the property will be in her and her brother's name, right? So that is clear title to our point, right? The name, but it's still fractionated ownership, right? She still got everything. Anytime she want to do something, if she live in the house and the brother not, she still got to call her brother every time she want to paint or she want to remodel. She's going to have to call her brother because they own the house together, right? And so while I'm sure the folks who were doing the will, they probably said, what do you want to do with the house? I want to leave it to my kids, right? That's, my guess is what she said, right? I don't remember this particular case, but I want to leave it. And so that's what they did. Was that the best move? Was that the best thing? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it made sense to leave, I'm making this up, the house to the daughter and the car and everything else to the son, the bank account to the son. So the amounts are the same, but now they got two things they can work with. Maybe it makes sense, because I don't think this is the case here, but if neither one of them was living in the place, maybe it made sense to say, look, sell the property, divide up the money. And if one of them wanted to buy the property, they certainly could on the open market. But the point is, it gets sold, the money gets divided. Right. So the point is, there's many ways to do this, but this will was structured in a way that A, the children didn't know what to do with it, so it was that hadn't carried on to the next generation, and B, it was structured in such a way that it was going to create really the same problems that we're just talking about here. Right. So that's something to be thoughtful about as you're. So we want to be thinking about how we don't create heirs property going forward. We'll share a couple other things on that, but we also want to think about how we consolidate our heirs property now. I think oftentimes we think about our properties, you may think, okay, I got a house, I got a car, I got, whatever it is you got, and you think about where those things go. We may not think about the 1/50th interest we have in the property in South Arkansas somewhere, or the 1/25th interest we got in a vacant lot somewhere in somewhere else, right? You may not think about that, but you can be intentional about that, right? And so you can imagine a situation where, let's say it's you have a vacant lot someplace and you got 3 kids, and those 3 kids don't want anything to do with that vacant lot. None of them live in the town. It's a vacant, maybe the lot where your mother's house was or something. You could take that interest, your interest in that lot, and instead of just saying nothing about it, to now have it be split between those 3 kids, to say, you know what, I'm going to leave it to one kid, so they can, at least one person can do all, or I'm going to leave it to the person who actually does want to have something to do with their property, right? So there's a lot. Point is, you can think about that interest just like, because it is your property. That interest is your asset. It's not the full property. It's an interest in it, but you can think about that interest with real intention to try to consolidate that interest, consolidate the fractionation, so it doesn't just get bigger and bigger and all those distant cousins you're talking about, right? And bigger over time. The other thing I'll share just quickly on estate planning, we'll open up for general questions, as I think we're coming to an end. I see Garbo hovering a little bit. So it's thinking about all the other kinds of tools that are out there. We talk about wills because they're very common and people typically know what they are. Sometimes a trust may be important. Sometimes there are other kinds of things like a beneficiary deed. Arkansas has a beneficiary deed. In some states, it's called a transfer on death deed, where you sign over this particular paper. It means nothing while you're alive, but the moment you die, that property goes to whoever it is you say it goes to. No probate, it just goes to them. Called a beneficiary deed. So that's something to ask folks about. Yeah. Mm-hmm. My guess is that you would have to do that in the state that it's in, right? So you'd have to, like, if you were in a state, if the property was in Florida and Florida has transfer on death deeds, you'd have to do it. That's my guess for something like a deed, because you have to register that deed with the clerk where the property is. So again, something to talk about if you have that, but that kind of tool can be really useful, because again, you don't have to go through probate. That if this woman that I was talking to, I witnessed her mother's will, if that mother had a beneficiary deed for that house, as soon as she died, it would have gone to him, no problem, done. She wouldn't have had to been calling me or trying to hire an attorney with 2 years left. It'd have been done, right? So think about those kinds of tools. Talk with your attorneys or other folks about that. Think about things like if you have accounts, this is not necessarily real property, but think about, do you have a payable on death on your accounts, your savings accounts, your bank accounts? If you pass away, is there somebody it just goes to automatically? So that, again, they don't have to go through probate. They can just do that. It doesn't have to be something where they're a co-owner of it now. It's just, if I'm gone, this is who it goes to, period, done, right? So I would just encourage folks, as you're thinking about estate planning, to think broadly about that. It's more than just wills, and you need the tools that are going to work for you. And maybe that's a will. Maybe that's a will for some of your property. Maybe for your real property, for your land and house and that kind of thing. Maybe it's a beneficiary deed. Maybe it's something else. So think about what's working and talk with your attorneys and those things about that. So I wanted to, let's see. We had the first person who's going to give here. I was going to give her this. This is a quick door prize. This is a resource called Money Smart for older adults. So I just wanted to share that. Again, I would encourage you. I'm sorry. Oh yeah. So, and I'll say the link to this is on when you scan the QR code or go to the link that's on there. The links are, so everybody has access. She was good. Yep. That's called Money Smart for Older Adults. So again, we encourage you to check out the QR code. There's a link there as well. You can, if you want to type that in, you type that in as well. That takes you to 2 pages of resources that talk about all these different kinds of things. For example, AARP has a really good guide on estate planning. And I think it's really good because it helps you think through all the questions you need to think about before you go to the attorney, right? So it takes you through all the kinds of questions you want to ask. What do you want to leave? Who are you thinking about? Do you have, gifts you want to give? You want to live $200 to the trustee board of church? Like, what is it? I mean, think about, so you think about all that stuff. So then when you go to the attorney, you've already done that work. And so I think that AARP guide, which is linked on there, is a really good tool for that. The document I told you about property that provides, it helps you think about what are the kinds of things you can do with property across the state. The sun don't shine the same everywhere. The wind don't blow the same everywhere. You might not need to put a windmill on your property because that wind may not blow there. So it kind of goes through and takes you through all that kind of stuff. That's linked on there. So a bunch of other resources there. So I encourage you to check those out. So in my last minutes or so, I will close. If there are other questions, I'm happy to hang out if there are other questions. But thank y'all so much for your attention, for your engagement, for your interest in this really important topic. I think it's important for us. It's important for our next generation. So I thank y'all for all that you're doing. Thank you. Thank y'all.
I don't want to rush you, but I know you have another presentation.
Absolutely.
But I want to say all the information that Karama shared with you, so very important for you and for your family. And Karama does do consultations. They'll take her card. I spent too much time with her side. Then she takes, will answer all your questions. So this is a great resource for our community. They'll take that and
Thank you.
consult.
Thank y'all so much.
That's why we have her here today. So the other reason we're here is because we do want to talk about it is enrollment period and all that.
Yeah.
But Neal White shared really good about that. This is generally a 2 week for to talk to Neal, to enjoy the refreshments, and of course the exhibition all the while is mixed about what's time. So it's time for you to get your affair. That's that being said, the second gallery we have to work with merch Louise months it was we encourage you to spend and review both the and the gallery. So taking on to Camille, Adrian Brown is very supportive person and volunteer to get all the youth communication working with the League Corporation. Thank you. And she's gonna end the program for us today. So thank you, Adrian, for doing that. And thank you, Karama.
Thank you all.
And Camille White.
Thank you. My name is Camille Watkins. I'm a local independent agent here. And one thing about getting your business in order is the business that you have right now. Right now is a very important time. This is your annual enrollment period if you're a Medicare beneficiary. It runs from October 15th to December 7th. This is the time where you're going to compare your current coverage against your options for next year. Whatever decision you make goes into effect January 1st. Also, if you're not a Medicare beneficiary, now is the time where you can enroll in an affordable care plan as well. You have all the way till December 15th. So keep in mind that now this is where you want to look at your coverage and see what you want to do for next year. And the things to consider are things like, can you see the doctors that you want? Does the plan cover your prescriptions? All those type of things is what helps you make a clearer decision on the right choice for you. Are there any questions about Medicare, Medicaid, or anything like that? For the affordable care, what's the income limit? There is not an income limit, but to get a subsidy, there is an income limit. A subsidy where the government will pay part of the premium for you. Yes, I believe it's 60,000 for a family of 4 is what the income limit is. And it depends too on where you live, how much your subsidy would be. Yeah. So that's something to keep in mind. But if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll be here. My card is here. check us out at watkinsinsurance.net.
Thank you, Camille, and thank you all for coming this afternoon to this very important topic of heirs property. Want to let you know about the next two Wisdom Wednesdays that we have coming up. The next one is going to be on December 3rd, right here. It will be with Lionel Davis. He's going to be talking about a day at Oaklawn Park. So one of the things that Garbo wanted to do with this program series is has some serious topics coupled with some fun topics. And so the next two topics are going to be really fun. A day at Oaklawn Park. And then on December 17th, we're going to have Tammy East come and talk about sipping and being a senior. So how to enjoy libations as a senior. So again, same location, same time, different day. December 3rd and December 17th. Want to also share with you about the BOAB book club that is going to be starting in January. The book club is going to be starting in January for young people. And so what we have today are a couple of gift cards for people that want to purchase books to go to be a part of that particular program. And so I'm going to ask someone to draw one of these, and then I'll have two people that will actually win a gift card. So they have to be present to win. Thank you, young lady. All right, so do we have Jackie Parrish? All right, very good. Congratulations, Jackie. All right. All right, and I'm going to ask my young lady over here to pull the other. Thank you. And then we have Gail Pittman. All right, congratulations, Jackie and Gail. If you are not following Pyramid on Facebook, would encourage you to do so, and please share these opportunities with others who may be interested in attending Wisdom Wednesdays. And thank you all again for coming out today.